Hi there, fellow loom knitters. Today we're going to focus in on 3 different techniques. The first is ribbing. We're going to alternate between true knits and purls. So we're going to create a flat panel, and we're also going to create a small tube. Then we're going to move on to the second technique, which will be using a long tail cast off around a scrunchie. And finally, we'll be looking at a couple of different thicknesses of I-cord, and that's going to hold it all together. Hold what all together, you say? Well, we're going to end up with a Teapot Cozy. Now you'll notice, here's your flat panel, and here's a couple of I-cords. Actually, this is a better side for the I-cord because we're going to look at skinny I-cords as well as a little bit thicker I-cords. Then, of course, the long tail cast on with the long tail cast off on the scrunchie. That'll keep it together as well. So, don't get me wrong, we are not going to be focusing in on the Teapot Cozy. What we're actually looking at are the 3 techniques on how to get there. So it's about the journey, not the destination. So let's take a look at the tools that you're going to need in order to create these 3 techniques. Tape measure, pair of scissors, a hair elastic, a crochet hook. Anything under a 5mm hook should be more than fine. A yarn tool, which picks up the yarn from the loom, a yarn needle, a button that has large enough holes to fit the yarn through, or you can just sew the button on using embroidery floss or some thread. You'll notice I've put in 2 different looms in this picture, and they are of different gauges, and I'd like to call your attention to that now. Looking at the looms, doesn't matter what gauge you use, so you can, if you've only got the older looms, that's no problem. And you can, because we are doing ribbing, you're going to want to mark your pegs, so you can use nail polish or stitch markers, elastics. One time I got a little creative. My daughter is never going to miss these stickers. The loom that I prefer is obviously the Flexi Loom, and I, as you can see, I've put it on alternating light and dark with the pegs. Helps me keep track of the stitches, the knits and purls. Elastic. It's a cheap elastic. It's nothing fancy, just a $1 purchase. If you're a sewist, they also have ribbons of elastic, like you can get strings and strings of them, yards and yards of elastics. Get a thin one, obviously. Said we're going to use a flat panel, and we're going to use circle for the scrunchie. And if you do want to create a little tube, you'll need obviously a smaller loom. The smaller tube, get this, is for a drip catcher. So it's not really part of the cozy. I mean, it can be, but you know, you can just crank out a few of these and have. So, and that one should be in cotton to catch the drips. You don't want, obviously, a fuzzy drip catcher because you'll get fuzzies in your tea. The next part of the Teapot Cozy is determining its size. So depending on the teapot that you're actually going to be using, whether it's a tall and thin one or a short and stout one, will determine how wide your panel is going to be and how tall each section is going to be. So if you've got a taller teapot, you're going to want to measure in inches, because we're not counting rows here, folks. We're going to measure in inches how tall that is, and we're going to add about another inch or 2 on there so that the scrunchie can grab a hold. We're also going to measure the bottom, because that's how many inches across the bottom section has to be. So our panel will start with one side and then go across the bottom and then go on the other side. One panel, 3 sections. Measure. It can get a little persnickety because of the ribbing, and let me show you what I mean. On the sides of this teapot, I've used a 2x2 ribbing, and it does go in and out based on the size of the teapot. So, I mean, you can go either way. You may have to try it a couple of times to see how much you'll actually need, because it does have some negative ease when you do knit it. And of course, if you're doing a 2x2 ribbing on the sides or a 3x1 ribbing on the sides or a 3x3, it'll be much more relaxed, and it won't have as much negative ease. So that'll impact the width that you're using. And now I'd like to focus in on the first technique. It is 2x2 ribbing, and you can see the ribs here. They are currently stretched out because they're still on the loom. Once they get a little bit farther out, you'll notice how they do relax and come closer together. But I've set up my loom in a straight line to create the panel. I have alternated the dark and light pegs so that this, for me, is a prompt. It is a visual, color-coded prompt because I have consistently, no matter what project I'm working on, the dark pegs I will purl, and the light pegs I will true knit. Because this is a 2x2 ribbing, I do 2 true knit and then 2 purl. And when I was first starting to knit, I could never remember whether the working yarn went on top or underneath the stitch that was already on the peg. I could never remember which was which, a knit and a purl. So I had created a technique that works quite well for me. And I apologize if English is not your first language. This is a trick that I use because being a visual person, as I said, it works for me. So the purls, you can see if you look at the dotted lines, I refer to the dotted lines as the existing stitches. So purl goes below the dotted line. It's a basement letter, as my daughter used to say. It's a basement letter, Mom. So, and the true knit, they are on top of that stitch. So they are on top. So the working yarn is on top and the purl is below. So that's how I remember which stitch is which. And as I said, I've gotten into the habit of creating a true knit on the light pegs and a purl on the dark pegs. As I come to the end of the row for this 2x2 ribbing, I will do the next 2 stitches true knits, and then I will do these 2 purls, and you'll notice there's 1 on the end. So that 1 stitch on the end, I'm going to E-wrap it as my last stitch, and then when I return, or change directions if you will, and go back with the 2x2 ribbing, I will slip that stitch. So I will not knit or purl it, I will skip it, formerly known as a slip stitch. And that's just so that I think I screwed that up, I did. Huh. Look at that. Okay, so that's a purl, purl, and now an E-wrap. And I'm just doing that, knit over, and then I'm coming yarn in front, and then this will be a purl. And I just wanted to point that out, that the last stitch on either end will be an E-wrap, and then the first stitch on either end will be slipped. And that's just to make a smoother edge, and it's easier to add something to that edge because it is so smooth. And it's the reason I also chose the crochet cast on as well, because it's easy to add something onto it later on if I change my mind and decide to fancy it up with a shell, a crocheted shell on top. So just saying, a couple of options there. I did choose the 2x2 ribbing because it is easier to show the stitches because it's actually a clear block. I want to call your attention to what your knitting looks like. So this is the wrong side of the fabric, and when you look at the dark peg, as I said, that's a purl. This is what a purl stitch looks like. Obviously I had an oops. But this is what a purl stitch will look like, and this is what a knit stitch, a true knit stitch, will look like on the wrong side. So your purls have the little V's, whereas your true knits are straight across when you're doing your knitting. So again, that's just so that I wanted to highlight that you could see and correct any errors as you go if you feel you've made an oops. It's easier to catch when you know what you're looking for. When you flip this over to the right side of the fabric, it is reversed. So now I'm looking at These are purl stitches, and these are your knit stitches. So these are true knits on the light peg, and these are the purls on the dark peg. Just something that will help you as you're knitting other projects. This Teapot Cozy is created in 3 sections. The first and the third section represent the sides, and the middle section represents the bottom of the teapot. So depending on the diameter of your bottom of the teapot will determine how many inches you're going to knit, as well as how tall the teapot is will determine how many inches your sides are. When transitioning to the center section, it should be a 1x1 rib, simply because the 1x1 is a tighter rib and will provide better protection between the hot teapot and whatever surface you sit it on. I get into the habit of, when I'm doing a 1x1 rib, the first peg on the link is a true knit and the second peg is a purl, and that's just a habit similar to the lights and the darks. I also do 1x1s, so it's a knit and then a purl. I find I make less errors that way. Also, just to